far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees.
Hello, I'm Jean Augustine. It's Black History Month in Canada. It was actually 28 years ago, December 1995, that I proposed a motion that we celebrate and designate Black History Month in Canada. A motion that was unanimously accepted by the Parliament of Canada. This year, the Black History Month theme is ours to tell, or stories to tell. In other words, it's up to you and it's up to all of us to keep the complete story of Canada. Because you see, Black history is all of our history. Black history is not just for Black people. It is Canada's history. And so our stories in Canada must be inclusive of all of us who are here, all of us who've joined our Indigenous peoples to create this great country we call Canada. So let's do this in this month of February, Black History Month. Let's all tell our story and let's all share each other's story. Happy Black History Month in Canada.
Good day, everyone. I'm Donna Jones Simmons, co-author, co-founder, and the architect of the 100 ABC Women project, as well as the executive producer of our Fireside Chats. Special thanks to our incredible technical support team, our moderator and panelists, who are the drivers behind our weekly inspirational conversations. Let me now turn you over to our moderator, who will introduce herself to you, as well as today's topic. Thank you.
So good afternoon, all, and welcome to 100 ABC Women Fireside Chat. As we continue to celebrate Black History Month, as Dr. Honorable Jean Augustine said, it's about telling our stories. 100 ABC Women is so pleased to present another important topic today: diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, with a focus on organizations ensuring that their employees feel included, especially given the new era that we're in right now in terms of people working from home. And how do we create an inclusive environment and workplace? These are conversations I'm sure you're having amongst yourselves, employees, employers, co-workers, and colleagues, and with your families. Today, I'm your moderator, also co-author and co-founder, 100 ABC Women, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and I'm looking forward today to having an awesome fireside chat with our esteemed panelists. So let me just get right into it and introduce each and every one of them. We have 4 wonderful panelists who are also 100 ABC Women honorees. So we will start with Rachel DeCoste. Rachel DeCoste is a recovering software engineer. I like that, recovering, and a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant in Ottawa. Her commitment to DEI, in case you don't know, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion, brought her to work on the then Senator Obama's presidential campaign, and again in 2012. Ms. DeCoste lived and worked in Washington, D.C. for a number of years, where she was appointed National Director of the Congressional App Challenge, a tech education initiative created by the United States Congress. During her tenure, she built the pipeline of future tech workers with an eye towards inclusion for underrepresented demographics. Ms. DeCoste was named to the top 50 Ottawa personalities in 2010. As a Huffington Post contributor for over 5 years, her op-eds touched on anti-Black racism and other forms of discrimination, immigration, and Canadian culture. She's been cited in the media by CBC, CTV, Radio Canada, in both official languages. Ms. DeCoste's consulting firm clients include school boards, law firms, and international corporations. And then we have Dr. Chrissy Doyle-Thomas. Dr. Chrissy Doyle-Thomas is a medical neuroscientist and professor in Hamilton, Ontario. She's a widely published expert in medical conditions that affect the brain and mental health. Dr. Chrissy is passionate about helping people maximize their potential as it relates to understanding how the brain works. She's committed to translating, excuse me, translating scientific research into meaningful information that can help communities live healthy, mindful lives. And then we have Michelle James. Michelle James is the Executive Vice President, People and Transformation at Scarborough Health Network, Ontario's third largest community hospital with over 6,000 staff. She's held senior leadership roles at this hospital for almost 15 years. She currently oversees human resources, workplace wellness, and several clinical programs, including mental health and addictions, cancer care, palliative care, nephrology, and diagnostic imaging. Michelle is the executive lead for equity, diversity, and inclusion and has advantaged the hospital's position in this area. Has advanced, not advantage, although it is an advantage, has advanced the hospital's position in this area. Michelle holds a Bachelor of Science in Human Biology, a Master's in Business Administration, MBA, and a Certified Health Executive designation. She thrives on providing strategic leadership for breakthrough organizational transformation and culture change. She served on a number of boards and was selected as one of our accomplished Black Canadian women for 2020. And then last but definitely not least, we have Sherry Sweeney. Sherry Sweeney is a young professional who leads with authenticity, inclusion, and integrity. She's been with TD Bank for over 10 years and is currently their National Talent Acquisition Partner for Black Talent. Love to hear more about that. She holds an honors bachelor's degree in communication and media studies from the University of Calgary. She is involved in various community work that includes co-chairing the United Way's Gen Next Committee for Calgary and the area. So welcome all of our esteemed panelists. So great to have you all this Sunday afternoon. So what I'd like for us to start out with is, what is EDI, or equity, diversity, and belonging for you? What does that look like for you? And let's start out with Dr. Chrissy Doyle, and we'll go around the panel. Doyle Thomas, that is.
Thank you, Dr. Denise. I really appreciate being here today. I think it's such a timely and important conversation. So thank you to yourself and the organizers for including me. I think within an academic setting, when we're talking about higher education, what equity, diversity, and inclusion would look like is a time when the academic community reflects the diversity and the differences within the community. I think that is very, very important. And to achieve that diversity and equitable opportunities, there needs to be an effort to remove systemic barriers, to allow for proper representation at all levels of the academic community. However, representation isn't enough. I think, in my opinion, a diverse academic community must provide space for individuals to feel a sense of belonging, engagement, and empowerment. And I think this will go a long way in higher education to have equity, diversity, and inclusivity within the academic community.
Yes, and I agree with you fully. And, you know, as it's been called many times, the ivory tower tends not to look outward nearly enough, especially with the attitude that it is all-knowing with this knowledge and so forth, and that there is so much knowledge and diversity and ways of being and knowing that the community can offer. That I think that's an excellent way of looking at that. Sherry, what are your thoughts about it?
Thanks so much, Dr. Denise. And very similar to how Dr. Chrissy feels, but coming from the corporate side. And so within TD, diversity and inclusion is embedded into the fabric of our core values and our framework. So I am very proud to work for an organization like TD, but we recognize that there's systemic barriers that exist. So we work towards breaking them down. EDI, from my perspective, is creating space and making space for disenfranchised groups to pursue equity, especially in corporate settings. And EDI means roles like mine get to exist. I'm the first and only early talent recruiter for Black talent, and I'm about 10 months in. So I get to say I'm standing on the shoulders of giants and Black leaders that have come before me and really working to change the face of the bank every day, especially representation at all levels.
That's fantastic. And congratulations to you in this role. And I like that idea of creating space for many equity, diversity groups and equity seeking groups. The terminology keeps changing: equity deserving, equity seeking, diverse groups. I don't know, keeps evolving, but that's certainly important to create those spaces and the traditions of these different corporations tend not to embed that within their structures. So having individuals like you there to help and aid in creating that space, and obviously the leaders agreeing to create a position like yours is absolutely fantastic. Michelle, the healthcare system is going through so many changes and challenges these days. What is your vision in terms of how equity, diversity, and belonging looks like, especially with so many people leaving the sector because of all of the different pressures?
Yeah, great question. And like the other panelists have done, I just want to start by acknowledging 100 ABC Women and thank you for including me in this fireside chat. As I read the bios for the other panelists, I realized that my list of heroes and sheroes is getting longer because I've now added 4 more of you to my list, and I'm honored to be part of the panel. The other thing that's interesting being part of the panel today, just in terms of context, is I returned from Ghana, West Africa, just last night, and I'd spent 16 days there. It was my very first trip to Africa. And I don't know exactly how, but I know that that experience is going to change my perspective on EDI. I'm really kind of processing what I learned and saw there, and what it means to really go back. You know, even the land acknowledgement identified us as people of African descent. I have a much better appreciation of what that means, and a much better appreciation of historical racism and so many other things. So stay tuned for how that's going to impact my approach to EDI. But from an organizational perspective, and you mentioned healthcare, I have to look at it from 2 perspectives. One is that sense of equity, diversity, and inclusion for the patients that we serve and the family members that accompany them to the hospital, and ensuring that they, at their often most vulnerable moments, feel included and safe. And that's a very important aspect of what we're focusing on in terms of health equity and eliminating disparities in health. And COVID really shone a spotlight on that. I think for today's session, though, we're probably more focused on the workplace. And in Scarborough, and you can see I'm promoting Scarborough Health Network and the Love Scarborough campaign with my background, but we have a very diverse community that's very vulnerable and has been subject to a lot of stereotyping in Scarborough. But the workplace, we're really proud that our workforce reflects that diversity. So I think the population of Blacks in Canada is somewhere between 3 to 5%, but in Scarborough it's 11%, and that is based on our last engagement survey. That's the percentage of Blacks that we have, and many other groups as well. So for us, and what we've articulated in our EDI strategy, we want the workplace to be where people feel comfortable bringing their whole selves to work. So your whole self, not just you as a nurse, but you as a female nurse or a male nurse, a Black nurse, a Filipino nurse, whatever, Indigenous nurse, whatever you're, a Muslim nurse, whatever that is, that you need to feel comfortable in this place where you spend so much of your time. And for our healthcare staff, they just go, they've given so much, especially during the pandemic, that you have to feel that comfort with sharing your stories, with feeling that you have access to every opportunity that's available, that people understand you. So those are, that's really kind of our vision, is that sense of belonging. And I saw a study recently from the US that said that sense of belonging has actually replaced compensation as the main reason, the main thing that people are looking for when they're searching for jobs. So when you talked about the healthcare crisis, I think that's something that all healthcare organizations need to be cognizant of as we focus on recruitment and retention, is that creating that sense of belonging.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for telling us about your trip and how it reshaped your views on EDI. I would love to hear more about that as we get further into our fireside chat. Rachel, could you tell us your thoughts? About diversity and belonging.
Thank you, Denise. First, I'll just add to what Miss James just said about going to the motherland, which I did over 5 years ago for the first time, and I've been back 4 or 5 times since. And it relates to your question, because when we're in a space where our skin color, our curves are correct and normal, it changes the way we see ourselves. And that weight that you don't even know you have, that chip that you don't know you have on your shoulders, at least some of us didn't know that we have it, it just magically disappears. And when I'm in the motherland, specifically in West Africa, I feel so much lighter. And I feel like the mud that's in my wings, the discrimination that we experience in this country, just is gone, and I can fly. So to answer your question, what does diversity, equity, and belonging mean to me? It means being able to be your authentic self 24/7. It means having psychological safety 24/7. It means seeing yourself represented in every facet, every sphere of activity, like whether it's religious, healthcare, educational, politics. It means seeing yourself. And ideally, the absence of code switching. And if we were there, my job wouldn't exist. So, but that's my goal, is to eliminate the need for these diversity consultants to help level the playing field. And it's work that I enjoy doing because I feel like it's building the future for our children, that it won't be as hard for them as it was for some of us.
Absolutely. It's certainly about future generations, and just imagining being in a place you don't have to worry about code switching, you don't have to worry about psychological safety. You just see yourself reflected any and everywhere that you look. That's quite amazing. I guess all of us need to just pack up and go. ASAP. But anyway, back on topic. Going back to you, Rachel, given that there are these various barriers as some of the other panelists spoke to, what are some of the common errors that employers do when they try to put in place a DE&I program? What are the missteps?
There are a few things. First, it's confining DEI to HR, human resources. Although that would be the first point of contact, it's hiring, retention, and promotion without bias. But DEI should be also about how you give the contracts and the catering, and the music that plays in the elevator. It's not just about people hiring people and making sure they progress in their career, but also having a wraparound in all facets of the business. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around power dynamics and how psychological safety informs how your employees can be when you make room at the decisional table for them, if they can speak without fear of retribution. I think that's a place where there needs to be room for improvement. And the last example I'll say is lumping all minorities in one, although it's tempting because it means that you can maybe just put one person in charge and all, LGBT, racialized minorities, people with disabilities can all be serviced. The fact is that we all have different experiences. We all have different pain points, and we can't have a one size fits all solution to the inequities that exist in the workplace and in the society in general.
Absolutely. And it would make it so much easier for them if they could just use one roadmap, but it requires intentionality. It requires understanding the community upon which they're trying to include within their organizations. I do want to pick up on what you mentioned about HR, because it's been my experience, given my own expertise in equity, diversity, and inclusion in post-secondary institutions, that they either try to relegate it to either human resources or to a student services function, and not so much the entire organization. So where should it be embedded? I know you mentioned some areas, but in terms of a actual office function, where should it go?
In my opinion, it should report to the top executive, the VP or the president of the company or the CEO. Just like finance, just like HR, it should be on par. But mostly we have to understand that the work happens not necessarily in the DEI office, but in the other offices who have to implement these ideas specifically at the decision making levels. That's where you can have the most impact. And too often it's relegated to I don't like to say lower levels, but the people who don't have any decision-making power. And so it becomes very performative. Yeah. So there's a lot of ways that this could go, but definitely if it's only in HR, then you're only getting a smaller piece of the pie. I want to also add, because I've spent some time in the United States, it was eye-opening as a Canadian who has only mainly got information from the media about how America is so much more racially insensitive than we are, and be happy with what you have. I spent about 4 years in Washington, D.C. And what was interesting is that they have the idea of taxation without representation. And in the United States, if you get $1 of federal money, then you're accountable to show to the federal government that you spent that money evenly across the demographics that you're supposed to serve. And I love that idea because it almost guarantees that there's representation. And if there isn't, there's ways that they can mitigate that to ensure that Black-owned, Latino-owned, Indigenous-owned businesses get their fair share. And I would love to have that become the norm in our country. And if it's not going to be on the federal level, it could be in other levels of government or in even the business sector. So that's really how I would answer that question.
That's a fantastic answer. And just picking up on the fact that there's accountability built into that program, and the various different communities that ought to be represented need to be shown to be represented is really important. And these days, given the unfortunate murder of George Floyd and others, not only in the US, but also in Toronto, there's been companies with their eyes more or less open to understand that there are very serious barriers that Black folks, both men and women, confront on a daily basis. So turning to you, Sherry, with the fantastic role that you have in TD to bring about Black talent and making it seen, and tell us a little bit more about your vision specifically for that and how you work with your team to begin to bring that to reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. And it's rewarding work. Every day I have the honor and privilege of bringing brilliant Black minds to the bank, students in particular being early talent, so students and recent grads, and getting them into internship and co-op opportunities, and just giving them the critical experience and the skill set they'll need that hopefully, we look at retention later so that when they finish their studies, TD is the employer of choice career-wise. But very proud to say with TD, Rachel had mentioned essentially spreading diversity and inclusion initiatives, not just in HR. And TD has actually stood up a diversity and inclusion committee around the enterprise in every single business unit. And there's an executive sponsor to that. And so then it's not just kept in HR, but it's top priority. These discussions are happening at the top, trickling down. And so it's just, like I said, it's just embedded into kind of our fabric. And that's how we do that. So my role as the National Talent Acquisition Partner for Black Talent is having these discussions, having these uncomfortable conversations and saying, I notice in your particular business unit, there's severe underrepresentation. So let's look at strategies to address that. And so it's the end-to-end, essentially, recruitment experience. So making sure that I'm bringing the top talent, making sure that, that there are diverse hiring panels and interview panels so that there's not the unconscious bias happening. Like I said, there's lots of work to be done, and we're nowhere near close. My vision naturally in this space is, I had mentioned earlier, but, changing the face of the bank. Increasing representation. I also think of the students. I want them to have a great colleague experience. I don't want to just bring them to the bank and put them in a position where they don't feel like they have a sense of belonging. I get very invested, and it's very close to my heart. So sometimes the work can be taxing. But overall, my vision is that my role shouldn't have to exist and that I don't need to be a mechanism to leverage, and that these kind of practices and activities are just happening, just naturally without me kind of, being kind of the middleman in between. So that is absolutely the hope. Like I said, I'm 10 months in. I imagine my role to be around for some time, but one day it won't have to exist. And that is absolutely the goal.
Embedding it within the organization is so critical. And because they're not, traditionally, they haven't done this. I mean, this work hasn't really been around that long in this form. With myself having done this work for about 30 years, it really just started with the principle, just don't discriminate. Make sure you look at people in many different communities and recognize the expertise they bring to the table. And given you mentioned Rachel working in the US, affirmative action was really a tool, a policy that was used to not ensure that people got in the door, but at least they were interviewed. At least their application was seen, instead of tapping different people on the shoulder and just giving jobs away like candy. What many people don't understand is that if it wasn't for affirmative action, a lot of people who are not racialized wouldn't have necessarily had access to jobs, because it required people to post positions. Who knew? Something as simple as posting a position. How do you know they're there if they're not posted? And I find that there are so many different ways to get around doing policies and implementing policies so that everyone can belong and be included. Michelle, I'm just wondering from your perspective, given that you oversee such a large organization, how do you ensure that these kinds of policies operate in the way that they should so that people don't skirt around the rules and make sure they're friends or family, or that is primarily non-racialized folks who get these opportunities versus racialized or those from other equity-seeking groups?
Great question. Great question. And I believe it's something that starts at the top, but has to be embedded in the culture and the values of the organization. We're very fortunate in Scarborough that I can say, and we're not perfect, of course. I've been there 15 years. But there are very few visible minority leaders at the most senior levels in hospitals. So we're really fortunate that I'm not the only Black woman who's an executive vice president. There are 2 executive vice president roles, and both are filled by Black women. And we report to the CEO. I'm only aware of one Black CEO in the province, my good friend Jackie Swiper Taylor in London. But there are many hospitals that wouldn't have that reflection at the senior level. And it's not just the reflection, it's the lived experience and the perspectives that we bring. And there's so many studies, I don't even think it's a question anymore, that it's been widely acknowledged that when you have diverse perspectives at the table, you get better decisions. And companies are more successful than when they lack that diversity of perspective. So I think that has worked in our favor. And we work with from the board of directors right on down. We had a great session with our board about 3 years ago, really to validate that they are on board with us seeking to be the leaders in our sector when it comes to EDI. And they endorse that. And so recently, when we were rolling out some new training on health equity, we did it with the board of directors and the senior team first, before we gave it to everyone else. And we have a strategy. And to be honest, I should have probably done the strategy earlier. But once I was asked to look after HR, which was only in 2018, I wanted to have some visible, sort of low-hanging fruit, things that people could see to really know that we're taking this seriously. But we do have a strategy now that is widely promoted, and there are 4 pillars, and one of the pillars is create a sense of belonging. That's one of the priorities of our EDI strategy. The other is data collection, because you have to have that accountability. You have to see how you're doing. If it matters, you have to measure it. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at, is collecting data on our workforce, on the types of patients that we serve, all of those sorts of things. The other pillar is training and education. And so that takes many forms. There's health equity training, there's training on anti-racism, there's training on privilege that's coming soon. And we have the benefit, we talked earlier about the academic setting, is that we're a part of the Toronto Academic Health Science Network. So that's a network of 14 hospitals that works closely with the University of Toronto. So we get some economies of scale. And one of them actually was the development of a great module on anti-Black racism that was initially developed by Dr. Natisha Massaquoi, who is now at U of T Scarborough. If you don't know Natisha, you need to follow her on Twitter. But we all, as a group of 14 hospitals, adopted that module. So we didn't all have to spend time and resources developing our own. And the 4th pillar of our EDI strategy is service delivery, which I mentioned, how we take care of patients, how we show up for patients and their families, and making them all feel welcome and giving equal access. So those are all really important things. And I just wanted, if I could, just to touch on the points that have been made about how you even organize this. And I loved everything that Rachel said. I feel like you've been inside of my head, Rachel. I can't believe I'm just meeting you for the first time today, because it's something that we struggled with, and you have to really think about it. I think often in organizations, certainly in the nonprofit sector, often there really is just one person who's been hired or assigned to look after all things that even rhyme with EDI. Everything goes to that one person. And a lot of hospitals started that way, and our hospital did as well. But now I have a department of four people. But one of the things that was important to me was to understand the nuancing of it. So I have one person in the role of workplace diversity and inclusion specialist who is very focused internally, because it's like a little city, 6,000 people. It's bigger than some towns in Ontario. And so we have someone focused on the workplace aspects. And initially that person was situated in human resources and organizational development for all the reasons that you said. But I also had other folks who were more externally focused and focused on health equity and health disparities and things like that. And it was just last year that I actually moved the workplace diversity and inclusion specialist out of HR and now have more of a health equity department, because I realized that I was missing out on some potential synergies and just creating that critical mass and not making that workplace diversity and inclusion specialist feel like she was on her own, or the health equity manager not feeling like she was on her own. And together, oh my gosh, now we're doing some really great things. And I have a health equity lead and some other positions, and they're under a director. So structured like any other department in the hospital. So that's been really helpful. And I could speak more later, if it's appropriate, to some of the specific examples and things that we've done. But I think really getting that organizational commitment at the very highest level from the board, the senior leadership team, putting the resources behind it in a very thoughtful and intentional way really, really helps to lay that foundation for an effective strategy.
Yeah, that's so important, that there is thoughtfulness and intentionality and strategy brought to the DE&I work. As you said, Michelle, oftentimes, and it's the same for universities as well as other organizations, they tend to start with one person and think, okay, we're done. We got it. I can point to that person and just send everything their way, but they wouldn't do anything else that way. So why is it? Why is it do these organizations start off? Because it's my opinion is that they are more so in a reactionary kind of function than really thinking it through, as you said, thinking through every element of it so that it permeates throughout the entire organization. And other aspects, for example, in higher education, again, the focus tends to be on HR, but it also impacts who's in front of the classroom. It impacts the students. It impacts what's being taught. And that's so very important, especially for what Sherry is doing, because she's looking for talent that's coming from the universities. So that's a heads up to you, Dr. Chrissy, that I'm going to turn to you and would really love to hear how you go about making the classroom inclusive and aiding the students who you teach to be ready for a world that is looking for individuals like them and like a TD or other organizations who want to bring in great talent, Black talent in particular.
Yes, Dr. Denise, thank you so much. And I agree, it's so important. I think when I reflect back on my training days, there were, I think for the entire time, I didn't have any professors or mentors that looked like me. Either they weren't female or they weren't Black. So there was a period of time, right, where, and even today, where I can be the only Black academic in the room. And of course, I am operating out of Hamilton, so that is its own community. It might not be reflective of everywhere across Canada, but it is, there is a need to bring about diversity, to understand what diversity means, equity and inclusion, and to foster that a bit. how I personally do it. And of course, as a professor, I have control over curriculum. So I am intentional about how I approach EDI within my curriculum. I try to do three things in general. One is really enhance accessibility. And that's not only for racialized groups, but even for those who have a disability of some sort. A curriculum development framework that I am a really big advocate for is universal design for learning. And what this is, it's an evidence-based, inclusive teaching practice that really creates equitable learning experiences. The way that I structure my teaching, it's flexible enough that all learners can access information in ways that's most meaningful to them and most easy to access. So of course, the accessibility aids that might be needed for someone with a learning disability or a neurodevelopmental disability is already included within my teaching delivery. So everyone, not only those with a diagnosis, but everyone can access the information in a way that's most suited for them. I always use the example, I'm a very visual person, so I can't sit there and listen to someone talk endlessly and think I'm going to attain the information. You need to show me something. You need to show me in pictures and videos. So those kinds of components are always within my lectures to make sure that not only those who have learning strategies that are most suited to them, but everyone is benefiting from it. There's like the research behind UDL talks about, it comes from architecture, right? You're building a ramp to get those who require mobility aids to get into a building most easily, but really the parent with a stroller is benefiting. The person on a bike is benefiting, right? There are all different types of people who can benefit from those accessibility aids. So in terms of EDI, accessibility is very important to me, and having accessibility within my curriculum is very important. Something else that I do is really try to enhance the social relevance of my content. So I am within the health field, academic like health education. So of course, as I mentioned, I would use many different examples that really reflect the experience of people within our society. So I'm using images and videos and supplementary case studies and all these discussions that reflect the people's experience within the society. I think that is so important that students see themselves in the content and they're motivated and inspired to learn about other experience. So that's really important to me. When opportunities arise, I bring in guest lecturers from diverse backgrounds. If there is topics of, like, for example, Indigenous experience, I will bring in a guest speaker who's knowledgeable in that area, or at least a consultant that can help inform my delivery of the content. That's really important. And then the last bit that I try to do within my curriculum is really support changing attitudes. And how I do this is really by nurturing awareness and insight through class activities. There are assessments that I give there that we do the theoretical things, give me the characteristic of this diagnosis or this disorder. But now let's reflect on societal attitudes. Let's reflect on the influences that's contributed to those attitudes, whether it's entertainment or religion or culture or media of any type, right? And then we question that, we challenge those things. We allow folks to share about their own lived experience, and also an opportunity to kind of inform their colleagues' understanding of those kinds of things. I really think that's a very important part of learning, is that critical thinking and being exposed to diverse opinions, and not to shut it down, but to be open and receptive to what it is and explore your learning through it. So those are three ways that I try, like within my control as a professor, to bring a lens on equity, diversity, and inclusion, where I present an opportunity for it. And I also hopefully have my students really become more global citizens by kind of understanding the nuance from other folks' experiences, and how that reflects their practice when they get to the community.
That's absolutely wonderful. And I have to say, I appreciate you bringing up the accessibility element of your work, and how you see that as being very important. I would imagine because of your neuroscience background, that's an important piece for you as well. Myself being a parent of a son who uses a wheelchair, we just found it that people make and I used to make a lot of assumptions about being able to get into the classroom, where you can sit in the classroom, just simply because you're in a wheelchair. You can't even get to the front, you're in the back, and you can't engage in the way that most other students can. So that is such a profound piece, because we, Black folks, folks of African descent, are not one-dimensional. We have a whole range of disabilities that we have in terms of our experiences. And so that's, excuse me, really important, excuse me, a really important aspect of the work. In thinking about what you were saying, it made me wonder, how does the leadership really reinforce the values that all of you all are talking about? And Michelle, you mentioned the board and making sure that you started at the top with the training of the board and various leaders. Rachel, you've worked with boards, you've advised boards. What would you say are some of the key aspects that boards need to take into account to support their various leaders in different organizations like TD, like the Scarborough Health Network, or different universities?
Well, one of the important, Dr. Jean Augustine said at the beginning that this year's theme for Black History Month is ours to tell. And I think it speaks to an issue where information, stories are told by people about us, but without us. And sometimes that means you get a distorted view of our experience. So we need to have our voices at the table. And what I advise boards to do, and sometimes I've been that person in that room that hasn't been from the mold of the powerful demographic, which is usually white male, a certain age, able-bodied, cis, is if there isn't somebody who represents those marginalized group at the table, you have to make room for them. And that might be setting a specific space, affirmative action, if you will. It might be getting a consultant in, but you can't keep on making those decisions that affect all of us with nobody that looks like us in the room. And that takes leadership, because there will be naysayers that will say, well, how come they get a seat at the table? They didn't earn it, they weren't elected, etc. But you'll have to be stronger than that and show the leadership. And that's what I think a very big pain point for big boards and respected boards is that they realize there's people missing, but they don't know how to fill that gap. And waiting until it happens, quote unquote, naturally, until some magical Barack Obama just falls on your lap, you might have to force it and bring a lawn chair, just like presidential candidate Chisholm said. So that's the first thing. Another thing they can do is model the behavior. So we know that when leaders not just say it, but do it in their everyday work, whether it's a signature, whether it's a land acknowledgement, whether it's going to an event during Black History Month, Asian History Month, it's being physically active and rewarding those who show leadership, rewarding the underlings who take that risk, who do something that hasn't been done before. And lastly, I want to add that to another speaker is one of the ways that we know works to address disparities in the unlevel playing field, especially in hiring, is blind resumes. There was a story on CNN, I want to say 60 Minutes, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, where the US Army decided that when they were promoting each other, they would just show the CV, the accomplishments, and they would have a picture of the service person, but hide their face, but show their badges. And almost overnight, a lot more Latinos, African Americans, women got promotions because the biases that we all have, even if we take the training, that's embedded in how in the society, they're not able to do that. The second example is in the arts world, again, in the United States, they had blind auditions for orchestras. I feel like it was Philly, but I could be wrong. Overnight, a whole bunch of women and minorities were the best violinists chosen to join these prestigious orchestras because you could not see who was playing. You had to just judge on talent. So if we admit that we have these biases, that our training may not fix it, there are ways you can act to prevent that from being part of the decision making. And I guarantee you, those who have done it have seen the results almost immediately.
I love you bringing up those examples. It's like the program The Voice, where all the judges, they have their backs to the contestants, and it's purely based on talent, not the so-called full package as they call it in the industry, it seems. Yeah, those are perfect. And Rachel, did you have anything else to add to respond to Dr. Chrissy's comments earlier?
I've already addressed those. She had great answers, and I wanted to add that our story. I love that she said, Dr. Chrissy said she brought in some special guests in class, and if she's talking about Indigenous people, she tries to find an Indigenous person to talk because it's their story to tell, and it can vehicle the stories and the experiences so much better when the subject is also speaking from their own voice. So I applaud that she does that, and I encourage other people in the education field to follow suit.
Great. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. I want to turn to you, Sherry, given that you're in Calgary, right? And you're operating nationally. From that perspective, how do you guarantee greater belonging and inclusion when you're working with a team remotely? And I think from some of the research that I've seen and articles about belonging, and others of you can comment on this too after Sherry speaks, the idea that for racialized folks, especially those who endure microaggressions on a pretty regular basis, working remotely at home is actually a respite from the work environment. But then there's the counterpoint of FaceTime and being seen, and that idea of you have to be seen to be promoted and all of that. I'm just sort of putting that out there for us to think about and respond to. But Sherry, please tell us how you go about creating that sense of team with remote colleagues.
Well, thank you, Dr. Denise. Those are great points, and it's a great question. And I have to say, one of the most impressive parts about my job is it's a national function, and I'm making impact from behind a computer screen in Calgary, Alberta, knowing that 95% of my co-op internship opportunities are typically in the GTA. Some are Halifax, we have Montreal, Vancouver as well. So it just shows the power of networking and building relationships. And in my particular case, I can operate outside of geographic barriers. So I can tap into this huge network and tap into talent and students and professionals all across the country, which I think has been wonderful, rather than it can be very pricey on the other side, traveling, et cetera. And so, I do have to say, with the pandemic kind of ushering and allowing kind of the evolution of technology to go that way, where we're so comfortable virtually, it allows me to do my job in a way that I wouldn't dream of before. And so ways I stay connected. So I stay tapped into my local community. I love getting out. I love giving back, paying it forward. Within TD, we have employee resource groups, and we have a big Black employee network that was founded in 2007 by some really talented Black leaders. And so we organize that. We have a national chapter, but then we also have local chapters. So just last night, I took in a Booker T jazz concert because the Black Employee Network came together, and we were able to do that via the concert. And I also sit on national committees as well, which we, just have monthly touch points that are also virtual. So lots of benefits in my world, having that virtual component. That's really how I stay connected, because it can be isolating. I'm home all the time. It's just nice to get out, and just finding ways, coffee chats, as much as I can. And just finding ways to stay connected to my colleagues. Sometimes we don't want to just talk about work. We just want to be a Friday and have our own little happy hour, like obviously within an appropriate work setting. It's just finding those ways and thinking outside the box and staying creative, because it can be very hard from home. And sometimes your environment can be distracting as well. I've got a little toddler, and sometimes he runs around and I have to shush him when I happen to be on meetings and things. So it's interesting, because I know a lot of the workforce has transitioned back to the office, or they've kind of adopted a hybrid model. I happen to be mostly remote. It does allow me to travel sometimes as well. But I'm almost still very much in kind of that pandemic environment, which is interesting. But, it fills my cup, and I just find different ways to stay connected.
Yeah, I love that. Wish I could have gone to that concert. That sounds fantastic.
He was amazing.
Yes, absolutely. Sounds like TD is doing some wonderful things. And the fact that the employee group has been around since 2007, that's pretty phenomenal. Sounds like they're thriving quite a bit.
That's right. Yeah. And I will add as well, and because I know we've touched on intersectionality in this conversation, but we've actually, when I mentioned we stood up committees around the bank. So we don't just bucket diversity all into one. So we have the designated, so people with disabilities and people from the Indigenous communities, Vismin, Black. It's just lovely. It's a lived experience. We can't turn off our authentic selves. We can't turn off, who we are, the color of our skin. To us, the LGBT plus as well. It's just really great to have that intersectionality and to kind of come together as colleagues and celebrate our differences, because it really is that diversity of thought. So thanks. Thank you for bringing that up earlier. And it just made me think of your son, Dr. Denise, and some of those barriers and hurdles that you have to work with within your family as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to be too shameless here, TD is one of our sponsors for the Fireside Chat. So we're definitely fortunate and appreciate you being here, Sherry, to share with us all that you're doing in your very new trailblazing position. And so for the other panelists, what are your thoughts with respect to individuals working more so remotely, or this hybrid type of model? Anyone can jump in.
I was hesitant to jump in because it's a hospital, so the majority of our jobs require an on-site presence. So during the pandemic, only 5% of our workforce was able to work from home. And it's a small percentage, but because we're pretty large, it was actually almost 300 people. So it was significant. And we did have policies on remote work. And we were very intentional about it in terms of the individuals that were leaders of the various departments and programs that had folks who were working from home, that they're still their leader, and, policies still applied. And even when we implemented our mandatory vaccine policy, we were clear it applies to folks who are working from home. So we were always very intentional about not forgetting that group, and leaders were trained in how to support folks that are working from home. Even folks that are in the office now, we still continue to have a lot of virtual meetings. So there are particular best practices around how you engage and make and give that sense of inclusion in a virtual environment for meetings. And of course, many of the initiatives that we have around EDI, the training and our communities of inclusion are open to folks who are working from home. So we have to ensure that the EDI strategy takes that into account, and it's not something that is based on our physical building or address, but it's something that really affects the entire workforce, regardless of where they happen to be working.
Thank you for that. And that's so true, because even during the height of COVID, many people, first responders, et cetera, had to be out there face to face. And many of those individuals, from my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, are from racialized populations who are the front lines first responders and didn't have the opportunity to stay home like so many of us.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I feel that, that sense of belonging is so critical, because of the incredible sacrifice that people are making, and some of the choices that they don't have. And I don't know if this is the right time, but I really wanted to talk for a minute about the communities of inclusion that we introduced, some of them actually during the pandemic. And that's another term. I think, Sherry, you used the term employee resource group. Community of inclusion is a term that I liked. It was in use by eBay, and their lead for diversity, equity, and inclusion, Damian Campbell, who I've read some of his stuff. So COIs, or communities of inclusion. And my goal was to try to create a new one every year. But we started in 2019, and the first one that we created, the acronym for our hospital, Scarborough Health Network, is SHN. So we created SHN Pride, and it was for our LGBTQ2S+ employees. So that was the first one in January of 2020. And sorry, all of these have a charter and an executive sponsor, who is someone that reports to the CEO, someone from our senior leadership team. At the time, there were 2 members of our senior leadership team who are part of that community, as it turned out. In 2020, we created our Black community of inclusion, which is called SHN Build, and Build stands for Blacks United for Inclusion, Leadership, and Development. And I'm the executive sponsor for that group, and it's fantastic. They've just been so great. They were created in, as I said, in early 2020, right before the pandemic started. I think we got Black History Month completed in February of 2020, and then everything went crazy in our environment in March 2020 in terms of the pandemic. But then everything went crazy again in May of 2020 with George Floyd's death. And I was so glad that we had already formed that group, because we saw a lot of reacting to the George Floyd murder, and organizations sort of scrambling, like, what do we do? Do we put out a statement? What do we do now? Everyone is upset about this. And I had the benefit of being able to convene a virtual meeting of our Black community of inclusion within about 48 hours. We had over 40 people on a call on the Friday evening. And out of that call, I put together an 8-point strategy, 8 ideas that they provided as to what do we do, and took that to our senior leadership team the next week. And I'd have to say, I think 7 of the 8 were implemented. And we started with the notion of healing and having some sessions with safe space sessions. And we struggled with how we're going to word this, because we don't want to be seen as excluding people, but really it was all about a safe space for people that were hurting. So we were able to have some of those sessions, and then I brought in some experts like Dr. Carl James and Hector Alexander, who was at Durham College at the time, to really help us to roll out some other sessions to leaders and to all staff. So we really put a lot into it, but it wasn't reactionary. We had already invested in that group, and they continue to be just so outstanding in raising the profile of the needs and looking at giving us recommendations on how we can be a better organization. And the third community of inclusion was just started in 2022. And what I observed during the pandemic was how our staff that were also working parents were struggling and impacted by schools that were now online, Sometimes they were closed, sometimes they were not. Also, the incredible toll that the pandemic took on the mental health and wellness of our young people. And, you know, if you're a nurse and your work environment is so stressful, and then you go home to that, and, you know, so the third community of inclusion we created was for parents, and they came up with their own name. It's HOPE, HOPE, which stands for Helping Our Parents Excel. So all of these names, SHN, Pride, Build, Hope, they're all created by the group, and they're also uplifting. I don't know what our next one will be, but as you know, we're learning more about privilege. And there was another session I attended recently that was created by our kind of Greater Toronto Area Hospital Network, and it's on privilege. And I felt that I knew a lot about privilege, but this session really encourages people to assess the various levels of privilege that they have. And one that I hadn't even thought of that I enjoy is a privilege around body image. And, you know, because one of the examples that they gave was the stereotypes and negativity that people face because of their weight, for example, or other aspects of body image. And someone talked about intersectionality. So all of these things impact people of all races. So really being open to kind of understanding the full range of all of the things that make up diversity and what it really means. I also have oversight for our fantastic spiritual care department that prides itself on being a multi-faith program that just during the pandemic, the number of staff that were coming, forget the patients, because, you know, obviously that skyrocketed because we weren't able to have visitors and family members in the hospital. So our spiritual care program, they were the ones that were there holding the hands of people that were dying and going through very bad experiences. But our staff were turning to spiritual care for their own counseling and healing. So the visits by our staff went from 40 a month to over 400 a month. From this department, people were finding just some sort of solace and safety in having that outlet, and it's people of all faiths. And so we also have a number of healing sessions. So I mentioned the ones for the Black community. We had a healing session for our Muslim staff after that terrible incident of Islamophobia in London, where that family was struck and killed by a vehicle. We had healing sessions when the graves were found at the residential schools, and members of our Indigenous staff and non-Indigenous needed a place to kind of take that sadness. So that's something that we're able to draw on with the expertise that we have in our spiritual care program.
It just shows how broad and expansive this work is when you're truly trying to be, as an organization, inclusive and to have true belonging. You understand, just from what you've shared, Michelle, and also Sherry, that it's not a one size fits all. There are different communities within an organization, and each community has its own needs. It has its own set of values, sometimes overlapping with other groups. And that intersectionality piece is a really important one to continue to take into account. And just for those who are listening, in case you don't know, intersectionality was a term created by Kimberly Crenshaw. She is a lawyer by trade. I'm not sure what organization, what university she teaches at now, but Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality. And that term was actually created to capture the experiences of Black women based on class, race, and gender, because how they interface with different organizations, different systems. Did somebody put something in the chat there? With different systems, it just shows how the intersectionality piece can really impact an individual when you take all three of those elements of one's social identity into account. And typically it makes it more challenging to get what you need from these systems because of these varying different identities. So still want to continue this conversation about remote work and hybrid work and making sure to continue to create connection. Dr. Chrissy, I know what your classes, your students are beaming in. How do you create that belonging, especially when they're in the classroom remotely?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Now we're back in person, and I can tell you that it's been a very different experience when we were forced to go virtual because of COVID to being in the same space. Now that we're back together, it's a very human experience where you can connect on multiple levels other than just words. You know, there are all these kinds of nonverbal cues that really facilitate healthy social engagement. And it definitely became quite challenging when we were virtual. And to kind of facilitate some of that, the programs that I teach in promoted more asynchronous learning so that folks can access the information at a time that was convenient for them, keeping in mind the pressures of family and work potentially, because I teach within the graduate program. So a lot of the students are already working in the field or such. So to create more accommodation, we really pushed more asynchronous learning. The challenge with that is that I feel we lost a bit of the human touch. It was out of our hands, right? It's COVID, a bit of the human touch and that connection. And, you know, some data came up. Well, of course, you know, everyone got their grades and did just fine. But I think it's socialization is very important and social connection is very important. The Canadian Mental Health Association came out with some data during COVID showing that, 75% of those who answered, their boss's question or their professor's question of how are you, responded with they're doing just fine. But only 37% of those Canadians were actually feeling okay. So it shows the discrepancy between our casual way of asking how folks are doing and their true feeling of the impact of being isolated and not being able to engage person to person in different ways. Even if you're virtual, having those check-in points, I think, is really important. That same study was looking at, pandemic driven growth in video conferencing and social media use. And they said about 47% of Canadians were feeling more isolated than ever, although they were still connecting via screens. So there is something to say about that human connection that I think we still need to take into consideration. And I really appreciate all of the wisdom on the panel of ways that organizations are trying to address that challenge. That I think we're still kind of fleshing out to make sure we're doing it well, considering that we are social beings and there is an advantage to our brain of us being connected socially and in a very authentic way. So we're still trying to figure it out, but now we're back in person, and I think it's a preferred way of learning, and we're trying to figure out the best practices going forward if we do have to do virtual.
Thank you for sharing that. It's good that people can be in person. There's nothing that replaces that. even though we've been able to, even through 100 ABC Women, we've been able to have a fantastic gala online and use all the bells and whistles when it comes to that. But when we were able to come back together this past September, oh my goodness, it was so phenomenal just to see everyone, give each other hugs, actually see each other smile. Sure, there were those who had their mask on, that was fine, but to be able to see each other's face and communicate that affection for one another is irreplaceable. So we do what we need to. We do what we need to. And there are creative ways to continue to bring about that belonging and instill well-being. I'm going to turn over to Rachel for you to give your thoughts about this topic.
For return to work, I guess my only comment on that is that for racialized women, for Black women, it's a contentious issue for those of us who can, work remotely, because we have been shielded for the past 3 years. And now we might come back to the, can I touch your hair? Or can I get the recipe for Jamaican patties, etc. So, and I know that talking back or speaking your mind has a cost. Often we have to choose between our dignity and our paycheck, and that's a difficult needle to thread. So being realistic, if you have to go back as little as possible. But I also have hope that those who are coming back to a better work environment where the past 3 years of discussions and training will bear fruit, and they won't have to navigate as many microaggressions as they did pre-COVID and pre-George Floyd. Fingers crossed. Now, I want to add that you mentioned Kimberly Crenshaw. She's an American civil rights advocate and a leading scholar on critical race theory. And she's a professor at UCLA and Columbia Law School, and she specializes in issues of race and gender, often intersecting to Black women. So, and yes, she invented the term intersectionality decades ago. It's become part of the lexicon of DEI. I teach about it when I do my sessions, and I really enjoy seeing the light bulb go off of some of my temporary students, executives and employees across Canada and the world who have a better understanding of the world and themselves through that teaching of critical race theory, even if we don't call it that. And salute to that Black woman for starting that ball rolling that we're all benefiting from today.
Yeah, appreciate you sharing that and giving a correct description of Professor Kimberly Crenshaw's work. I really appreciate that. We had the opportunity to hear her speak at then Ryerson University, now Toronto Metropolitan University, I believe, in 2012 or 2013. And it was just phenomenal to hear from her. So we are getting close to our time. And I definitely want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to give some closing remarks, or if there's an area that we didn't touch on or a point you really want to make sure our audience hears about and learns about. Let's start with you, Chrissy. If there are any other points or questions I didn't ask that you feel needs to be made here that people need to know about.
Thank you. I think I want to end, applauding 100 ABC Women for what they're doing, and I'll tell you why. Because it's creating an awareness of everywhere that Black women exist within the fabrics of Canada. And I think that's important if we're talking about EDI. Talking from my experience as a scientist, there weren't people who look like me. So the opportunity that I now have, because I've been part of 100 ABC Women, is that it's creating visibility for the next generation to see potential, to see opportunity, and for there to be an opportunity for exposure, mentorship, and support through the process. So I do want to thank 100 ABC Women for what you're doing. And if I can close off to say anything, is that for the community broadly, for those who are listening, take advantage of these connections and really connect your kids and the generation that's coming up to folks that look like them. So it's an inspiration of what can be, and we can support each other as we come through different sectors to promote more diversity in all offices across Canada. So I would just want to leave with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
I'll jump in here just because it's a great segue into some of the work that I do. Of course, I want to applaud 100 ABC women. TD is always a very, very proud sponsor. We love getting involved and supporting any way that we can. And I think there was a question in the audience from Norma who asked about, where, the person can learn more about some of the opportunities that we have at TD. So if there's anyone in the audience today who have, early talent in your life. So those in post-secondary students, recent grads, those who are just interested in careers at TD, please be sure to connect with me on LinkedIn, Sherry Sweeney. It would have been in, my name appears on the panel, but connect with me, happy to chat, happy to explore some of those opportunities. Right now I'm recruiting for summer. But the next cycle will be in fall, so starting in September. So happy to connect anytime. And even, high school, it's never too early to start. Lots of different kind of mentorship and mentorship series and different kind of diversity organizations to get involved with. And happy just to chat. So just thank you for the opportunity. And it's just been a pleasure to be on this panel with all of you wonderful, esteemed women. So thank you.
Thank you, Sherry.
I can go next, Denise, if that's okay. And there's so much learning that was shared in this session. I've certainly learned an awful lot and really appreciated the opportunity. And I think maybe I wanted to just make a couple of comments about governance and the role of boards of directors. Rachel addressed this topic really well, and how the tone at the top is so important, and the key decision makers have to be on board with those values around inclusion. And I've been on a few boards myself, and while I was on the board of Durham College, my last year as chair of the college, really tried to. I was the only non-white person on that board for the 4 of the 5 years that I was on the board, but really tried to increase the understanding of that. And one of the areas that's so important that Rachel touched on was just the representation on the board itself and the challenges with recruitment. And what most boards do as a best practice is they have something called a skills matrix, where they take stock of the skill sets and the types of people that are on the board. And that it's called a skills matrix, but it typically includes gender and age group and what community you live in. So the idea is to have a good cross section that reflects the stakeholders. But what I found is that even though boards would start off by saying, okay, we need to recruit candidates that are diverse, if they don't get suitable candidates, they move on and they fill those spots with other people. So I've used the example of, when we say that we have a gap and we need legal expertise, we're looking for a lawyer. If we don't find one, we don't fill the spot with a teacher or a farmer. We keep going until we find someone with that legal expertise. And we have to approach the diversity aspect with that same discipline and commitment. We need that for a reason. And I also want to make a plug. I was trying to find the link. There's a new organization that actually just had their official launch last week called Board Diversity Network. That's been created by 2 friends of mine, Oliver Jordan and Lorianne Beausoleil. And I'll try to find the link so that we can share that. But Board Diversity Network is actually going to be a training ground for people who want to be people from diverse backgrounds, who want to be on boards of directors. And they'll be offering some educational sessions. There's a whole program around it that people can take part in, and to really position them for those roles. Laurie and Oliver are both served on private sector boards. And I'm currently doing the Institute for Corporate Directors training program through the ICD to get that designation, to also position myself, even though I've been on a number of boards, they've been not-for-profit boards, and I would like at some point in my career to move to private boards. So there are organizations that are around to help support people in that, and I'll try to find the link so that I can share it with the group. But I think that governance piece, or if whoever the most senior decision makers are, really need to be leading EDI in all facets.
Thank you, Michelle. And Rachel?
I know we have 2 minutes left. I'll try to make this quick. On the topic of diversity, I was appointed to a national organization. I was the first racialized person and the first Black person ever to be appointed in this executive role. And I started in a difficult position because there was press, and the right-wing press wasn't happy that a Black woman had perceived power. And within 2 weeks, a person that worked in the organization, a Black woman, contacted me and said, Rachel, you've only been here for 2 weeks, but you've already made a huge change. I'm thinking, I just got here, I didn't do anything. Either she's crazy or she knows something. So I booked her on a Microsoft Teams meeting on a Friday afternoon so we could chat and maybe I could find something out. And she said, Rachel, I'm older than you are. I've been in this country for more than 50 years. I've never had a Black teacher, Black principal, Black professor, Black boss, Black director, Black DG, Black MP, MLA, mayor, city council. I've never looked up and saw somebody who looks like me until now. And she got very emotional as she talked about how she talked about me being an executive who looked like her, to her parents, to her spouse. And there's a pep in her step. She's excited to go to work because she feels like there's somebody speaking up for us. And I'm sharing this personal story because that's how powerful representation is. And all the women on the panel and some of you watching, many of you are that woman. And let that be your strength and inspiration to guide us through those difficult times and difficult moments, because just your presence matters. That's it.
Well, I think that's the best way to conclude this conversation. Your presence matters for each other, for our communities, for our young people, and for our future generations to come. And with that said, happy Black History Month. And I hope everyone has an excellent week.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment. It's your time.